Bring in Gbemisola Alonge from Stears Business, a financial journalist of Stears Business. Hello, Gbemi, and thank you for joining us. How are you, Gbemi? It's been quite a while.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Gbemi, are you okay? Good. Now I can see you. Gbemi, let's talk about the surprise limping out of the recession. Like I said earlier, that it seems we just crawled out like, like a baby. You keep your baby in the room, before you know it, you just crawl, without even without even thinking. So we just went out of the recession by surprise. Were you as astonished as other analysts were, beating World Bank and IMF estimates? Or were you on the side of the central bank governor that was so optimistic even when others were not optimistic?
Oh, definitely. I was shocked. It was a pleasant surprise, I must say. I did not expect that. I mean, like you said, major estimates put recovery as slow, and at most we saw Nigeria having like positive growth in this quarter or next quarter. So it was a pleasant surprise. If you actually look at the graph at the moment, it looks like something like a V-shaped recovery, but obviously it's not that, because we haven't gotten to pre-pandemic growth rates yet. But was shocked. I was shocked. I think everyone was shocked as to how we were able to grow.
So a pleasant surprise, just like you said.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it perhaps because there are no lockdowns, or there were no lockdowns in the fourth quarter? Perhaps the factories are a bit, they are working now more than they were working during the lockdowns. And perhaps the streets are being filled up again, unlike what we saw during the lockdown. So that, affected economic activities in the fourth quarter.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So what actually led to the contraction in second and third quarter was the lockdown, which affected supply chain for a lot of products. There was also crude oil prices were down, and quantity was down. Quantity was down as well. And then apart from that, we had issues with even agriculture. I mean, the entire value chain, everything, all products, all sectors were suffering. But then when the lockdown was lifted, we saw in Q3 we performed a lot better than we did in Q2, and oil prices were also increasing. As in Q4, Q2 we had negative oil prices, but in Q4 that was better. The federal government also was able to get some funding from the IMF, the World Bank. CBN was also quite supportive of the federal government. So Nigeria was sort of back to business as usual by Q4. And then the sectors that were also doing well by Q2, like the ICT and telecommunication sector, continued to do well. So, and then the agriculture sector as well continued to do well. So that's, those that were doing well continued, and those that were education and accommodation and food services still contracted, but the contraction was not as much as before. From the NBS COVID-19 tracking surveys, we see that even employment went back to pre-pandemic levels. So we're able to see that, people were back to normal. I can't say that income was as high as it was back then, but we're back to business as usual.
Gbemi, how dangerous is business as usual? Because our business as usual, yes, our business as usual is not good. It's not a good business as usual. It wasn't even good, yes, pre-pandemic. So how dangerous is it during the pandemic? Because we're still amid this pandemic. So how dangerous is that the government will not think and be smiling and be telling themselves now, okay, we've recovered from the recession, or we're back, we are not in a recession anymore after 2 quarters of contraction. So how dangerous is that? So that they shouldn't just be smiling and using that as a political victory, so to speak. It's time to roll up the sleeves, roll it up. I'm not part of them. I would have rolled mine up, but
Oh, definitely. Like I said, we haven't made a V-shaped recovery. we only made a 0.1% growth in Q4 compared to 1.9% that we had in Q1 2020. So we're not back to where we were before, but there's a bit of growth. Sectors like trade, sectors like even the crude oil sector also contracted. So we're not getting the kind of revenue we're getting before the pandemic. Things are not back to normal. Inflation is high. Consumer income is low. Even in the NBS survey that I referred to earlier, we actually saw that although employment is almost back to where it was before the pandemic, a lot of the employment is in the agriculture sector. So people who used to work in the non-food sector had to move to the agriculture sector. And when that happens, it's usually seasonal employment. So that means that those that were employed in Q4 might be unemployed in Q1 2021 because they were just employed for a period and not full employment. So that's something that the federal government needs to look into and ensure that it. So that's the kind of dangerous business as usual that you refer to that would need to be monitored.
If we take a look at the aggregate GDP for 2020, we still saw a contraction for the economy. So it's not uhuru yet. What the data means is that 0.11% growth for Q4. That means we're out of the recession, because when you have 2 quarters of contraction, you're being said to be in a recession for an economy. So what does it mean, even largely for the year 2020, that we still suffered a contraction?
Oh, yes, we did. Obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of crude oil prices were low. There were 2 devaluations. Different sectors were not producing as much as before. There was the lockdown, local lockdown. There was supply, like state borders were shut. Farmers couldn't get their harvest out of the farms to the markets. They couldn't get new produce for the new planting season. Different trade wasn't as good as it used to be. So different sectors, throughout last year, the fact that I said that we sort of moved to business as usual, sort of is the key word there, was key phrase there, doesn't mean that 2020 was a good year. We still had a negative growth. And coming from the 2016 recession, we haven't actually recovered from that. We're still making, up until 2019, we're still having very slow growth, 2% growth. And we're looking to improve that by 2020, and then we're hit again. So now we still have a lot more work to do to sort of recover from the effect of last year's contraction, and then try as much as possible to grow even beyond beyond the point where we're growing in 2019 and pre-pandemic years.
Maybe let's interrogate more the numbers from the NBS. And what we gathered when the numbers were released yesterday is that the agricultural sector as well as the ICT sector contributed largely to the nation's economy getting out of a recession in the 4th quarter of last year. What does it really say for these 2 sectors, ICT and agriculture? Agriculture grew 3.42%, but quite low. You can also say despite government intervention and government's attention to agriculture, so it should be growing more than that. Perhaps what are the factors inhibiting that we're not seeing as much growth as we should there, and for the ICT sector?
Okay, so I'll start with the ICT sector. Because of the contraction last year and because of the lockdown, a lot of businesses had to move their operations remote. So that meant that they had to rely on a lot of telecommunications. And the telecommunications sector, as we know, is privately driven. Most of the players there are private organizations. So to a large extent, they're able to make moves without some sort of inhibition. And so far, we've seen that the sector did tremendously well last year. Every single sector, they recorded double-digit growth. And the sector even, its contribution to GDP even expanded last year. So the agricultural sector as well, due to its large contribution to the GDP, it contributes 24% to GDP. So any growth we witness in that sector means growth for the GDP in total. So the GDP for agricultural sector, agricultural sector grew by 3% in in Q4. That was actually quite surprising because usually Q1 does way better than Q4 in past years. So seeing that we even passed our pre-pandemic levels for agriculture was quite impressive. But it's quite difficult to, production, the agricultural sector was already plagued with a lot of issues last year. We had climate change, there was a lot of flooding and drought, there was a lot of supply chain disruptions. Farmers, like I said earlier, farmers could not get their crops out and get new raw materials into their farms. There was also the issue of insecurity. A lot of farming communities were attacked by herdsmen. A lot of farms were burnt, like the market stakeholders mentioned earlier. So it's actually quite shocking that we were able to still record the kind of growth that we recorded in the agri sector. It's difficult to know what crops were responsible for this, but indeed it could be because of the contribution of the federal government in terms of loans and other forms of initiatives that have been introduced to the agricultural sector. There's still a lot of work to do. We can't say that. We've seen that food inflation is currently 20%. So there is no guarantee that we would be able to make the same kind of growth that we made in Q4 in Q1 again. So there's still a lot of work to do there to ensure that the sector continues to produce high output and we sort of manage the growth of prices, inflation as much as possible.
Mm. The sector that also grew there is broadcasting, which is my constituency, ICT and broadcasting. So I wondered what we did in the fourth quarter. Is it that we made more money? Or anyway, it's not even about that. Perhaps because we were all working. We were all also working even during the lockdowns. So that could explain the fact that why we're in the positive. So while we're working, perhaps some companies were also making money. But that's another topic for another day, which I'd like to dissect later. But let's take a look at other sectors that did not grow. The oil sector contracted by close to 20%, precisely 19.76%. What does it really say of this oil sector? Like you talked about earlier, from this report, we've seen that the agricultural sector contribution to GDP has increased from about 24% to 26%. But moving over to the oil sector, that is one sector that gives us more of our foreign exchange. What do you have to say about that?
Okay, I'd like to add quickly to the agri sector. Also, last year, a lot of large commercial agricultural sector companies like Okomo or Presco recorded record high revenue and profits because of the border closure. They basically enjoyed the fact that they were the only ones, and apart from the border closure, there was a lockdown as well. So they enjoyed a lot of growth. That's in last year. So the oil sector, obviously last year, due to the pandemic, a lot of countries shut their borders and also imposed lockdowns, which meant that there was very limited mobility. And then oil prices, as at Q2, we saw oil prices were negative in some cases. So, and then OPEC also imposed some production cuts, which meant that we had like 2016 situations again where production was low and then oil prices were low as well. So that was why we saw the contraction. And then also this affected revenue, like you mentioned, foreign exchange revenue, that affected it. But the government was able to sort of get loans from the IMF, World Bank, and that sort of, obviously did not get us back to our normal oil sector revenue rate, but it was able to sort of make up or support the government spending as much as possible. So, this year, should we expect oil prices are back to $63 per barrel? Production quantities in back to what it was before the pandemic, but the prices and activity going on in the rest of the world, countries are opening up again because they're starting to administer vaccines. So that means that we'll get back to pre-pandemic levels this year, and then obviously as we continue to move on for the rest of maybe next year as well.
Gbemi, what policies do you think should be accelerated right now or initiated by government to get us a better and a bigger rebound from what we've seen so far in 2020. Vis-a-vis the less fiscal space that government has, FX shortages, as well as perhaps, okay, oil prices on their side right now. Oil prices is trading higher. But what kind of policies do you want government to undertake?
Okay, so as much as possible, businesses will need to get back on their feet. So restrictive policies restricting importation or restricting business operations in different sectors would need to go for now. Like, we would need to actually accommodate business operations as much as possible. So inducing growth in different aspects of the country, in different sectors as well. Looking at sectors that, I mentioned earlier that the ICT sector, because it's very private driven, there's a lot of room for growth, and they're doing a lot more. So as much as possible, the government needs to give organizations and give different sectors the leeway to perform and expand. There is the ASCFTA that has started. So as much as possible, we need infrastructure to support trade as much as trade into the country and out of the country. We need to get back to encouraging organizations to sort of operate. So anything that's going to restrict businesses from operating or restrict trade, right now, I don't think the government should be doing that. So, and then also, we've seen that the fuel subsidy has been removed, and then electricity tariffs have also increased. So right now, every Nigerian will feel the impact of these price increases. The inflation rate, as we know it now, is calculated with weights and basket compositions since that were sort of put together in 2009. So we don't even know if the inflation could be worse because of these price increases in the electricity and fuel sectors. So right now, the federal government also needs to look at improving social intervention programs that would help sort of alleviate the increase in prices in these different sectors so that people can sort of use their income for anything other than food, fuel, and electricity. So, and then also so that they can help, because if people have income, business will not be able to sell, and then the economy is back to where it was before. So as much as possible, we need social intervention programs, and not the ones that we have where people, where it sort of only meets a small portion of people, but something that can be tracked, something that can be that can be transparent and can ensure that it gets to the poorest of the poor at the moment. So social intervention programs and accommodating business policies are what we need right now.
Okay, since you've come to the inflation which you talked about, if we take a look at food inflation, when I was looking at the data from the NBS, this is the highest so far of food prices, food price increase. I think the last data before this recent one, food inflation was at around 19.5%. Now food inflation is at around 20%, the highest in over 10 years, I must say. What does it really say, especially as government is turning so much attention to food production? The president is saying consume or produce, eat what we produce and produce what we eat, or however he's saying it. And the Central Bank of Nigeria's intervention funds for rice, the Anchor Boras program and other programs. Still, food prices are on the increase.
Oh, definitely, because like you mentioned, there are structural issues that have prevented farmers' output from increasing. So even if there's more money being spent, even if there's more that there are more people being put into the agri sector, if my output as a farmer is not increasing, if I'm not improving, if the risk of me going to my farm is increasing, then there really isn't much I can do. And then what's driving this inflation really? Insecurities. And then some of this inflation is also driven by expected inflation, right? So if I think that, okay, these farming communities are being burnt or they're being ravaged and farmers are getting killed, I'd expect that getting crops from these farmers would be more difficult in the next planting season. So what do I do as a farmer or as an agri output seller? I increase my prices in anticipation for the prices that would increase in the future, right? So these different things, and the fact that we keep hearing of more and more of these clashes and these issues means that people will continue to increase their prices. Also, the central bank's import restrictions on different agri produce. Last year, we saw the one for maize and how it affected different, not only maize sellers and the prices of maize, but also crept into poultry as well. So whenever these policies, like, it was so bad that the government had to even, release some maize grains from the strategic reserve, and then the CBN had to allow for some time some importers to bring in maize. So those issues, those policies just make people sort of hoard their own food and then increase the prices. So until we fix security issues in the farms, until we fix the issues with import restrictions, until we fix, I know that if we're to continue to go by the president's charge of what's eating, what we produce, it's important that they ensure, there's climate change, farmers are losing crops that they even want to produce. So it's important that we ensure that we increase the output by either educating farmers on how to plant better and how to increase their output, not just giving them money, but then ensuring that for each person, their output increases. And then we don't only give them money and, increase their output, but also ensure that moving the food from farm to market is cheaper. Also, if we're to introduce subsidies that would sort of reduce the impact of price increases to the value chain by the time it gets to the consumer. So if you're providing food subsidies, you'd ensure that the prices will sort of be capped or be restricted from growing by 20%.
Okay, Gbemi, one final question. Do you see the Central Bank of Nigeria being a bit hawkish right now as the next MPC meeting is looking around the corner? The next MPC meeting holds in March. Do you think they will be a bit hawkish because of rising inflation and numbers?
What causes the inflation is not necessarily the money, the flow of money in the sector, right, or in the economy rather. It's not because of monetary, maybe expansionary policies that the central bank or the MPC has taken in the past. It's because of these structural issues that we have mentioned. Food inflation, there's the devaluation and all of that. So there isn't really a lot that the MPC can do, right, to improve, improve or increase the MPR or anything like that. So there isn't much that the central bank can do. There isn't much that the MPR can do. Personally, I think that they would hold all their
parameters,
all their instruments at the moment, all the indicators, they would hold it. Or if they even if they want to, they might reduce slightly, maybe the MPR slightly to prevent inflation from increasing. But because the inflation isn't driven by money supply, it's mostly driven by structural issues,
factors.
Then there really isn't so much that the Monetary Policy Committee can do.
So it lies with the fiscal policy makers. Get security right.
Exactly.
Farm to market access should be better and all of that. Thank you very much, Gbemi, for joining us today on the program. Have a happy Friday and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's the much we can take. I have been talking with Gbemisola Alonge, financial journalist and economist at Stears Business. That's the much we can take today, this week. Thank you all for being a part of the show, not just today, but this week. I'll see you all again, God willing, on Monday. Be the best you can be the change you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Don't forget to wear a mask, sanitize your hands, wash your hands. I'll see you all next week.